The concrete mixer's diesel engine coughed to life at 6:47 a.m., shattering the pristine silence of Willowbrook, estates like a sledgehammer through crystal. Marcus Chen stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in his weathered hands, watching. The massive truck lumbered down Maple Grove Lane toward his property. Behind it, a convoy of black SUVs followed like pallbearers at a funeral procession. "They're really doing it," he whispered to his wife Alina, who clutched her silk bathrobe tighter around her shoulders. Of them had slept since the certified letter arrived 3 days ago. "Maybe we should call the lawyer again," Alina said, her voice barely audible over the rumbling engines. "There has to be something. It's too late." Marcus set down his mug with deliberate care, the ceramic clicking against granite with funeral finality. Phyllis Hartman made sure of that. Through the window, he watched the HOA president emerge from the lead SUV like a general surveying a conquered battlefield. Phyllis Hartman, 63 years of surgical precision wrapped in a powder blue suit, her silver hair shellacked into perfect submission. She'd been planning this moment for 18 months, ever since Marcus had dared to drill his well without her permission. The irony wasn't lost on him. In 1987, when he'd first broken ground on this half-acre lot, there had been no HOA, no covenants, no Phyllis Hartman with her clipboard full of violations. Wilkins, who'd owned all this land before developers carved it into suburban paradise. "Mr. Chen?" Phyllis's voice carried across the morning air, sharp enough to cut glass. She stood at his front gate now, flanked by 2 men in hard hats and safety vests. "I trust you received our final notice." Marcus walked outside, Alina following. Close behind, a 40-foot artesian beauty that had never failed him in 37 years. The same well that had sustained his family through droughts, emergencies, and the endless California water wars. "You know this is wrong, Phyllis," he said, his engineering background making him measure each word with precision. "Just decorative. It's functional infrastructure." "Unpermitted infrastructure," she corrected, consulting her tablet with the enthusiasm of a zealot reading scripture. Section 4.7 of the updated covenants clearly states that all wells, pumping stations, and water features must be approved by the Architectural Review Board. "He drilled without permission." "I drilled before your HOA existed." The covenants were retroactively applied when 80% of homeowners voted to incorporate. "You were sent the documentation." Her smile was winter itself. "Your failure to comply doesn't void our authority." Alina stepped forward, her interior designers, eye automatically cataloging the small crowd of neighbors gathering across the street, tucked under her arm, all of them watching from what they thought was a safe distance. "Please," Alina said, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent building this life. "This is our home. That well has been here longer than most of these houses. It's grandfathered." "And nothing is grandfathered in Willowbrook Estates," Phyllis cut her off. "We maintain standards here. Property values, community integrity." She gestured toward the wellhead with theatrical disgust. "That eyesore has been depressing neighborhood aesthetics for years." Marcus felt his jaw clench. The eyesore was a masterpiece of engineering, a hand-carved stone casing that he'd spent 3 months perfecting, drawing water from an aquifer 200 feet down. It had cost him $20,000 in 1987 money, a fortune for a young man just starting his career at Pacific Engineering. "You want to talk about property values?" Marcus's voice rose, despite his efforts to stay calm. "That well has never run dry, never failed. When the city water gets shut off for maintenance, when the pipes freeze, when there's an emergency, residents call the appropriate municipal services," Phyllis interrupted. "We don't encourage cowboy DIY solutions that circumvent proper oversight." The concrete truck driver, a weathered man in his 50s, climbed down from his cab and approached them. "Ma'am, we're ready to pour. You sure about this? It looks like a nice well. Shame to waste it." Phyllis's laugh was crystalline and cold. "Mr. Patterson, we're eliminating a code violation that's been plaguing this community for far too long. Pour the concrete." Marcus felt something break inside his chestnut, his heart, but something deeper. Through 18 months of HOA meetings, violation notices, and legal threats. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." Phyllis checked her watch, a gold Rolex that caught the morning sun like a weapon. "I'm protecting property values and community standards. 2 things you've never understood. The concrete truck's hydraulic systems whined to life. The driver positioned the chute directly over the wellhead, where clear, cold water had bubbled up from the Earth's depths for nearly 4 decades. Marcus had drunk from this well on the day his daughter was born. Alina had filled their first Christmas tree stand with this water. It had sustained their vegetable garden through 7 drought years when city water was rationed. "Wait," Marcus said, holding up his hand. "Just give me 5 minutes. Let me turn off the pump. Disconnect the electrical." "The time for proper procedure was 18 months ago when you received your first violation notice," Phyllis said. "Mr. Patterson, proceed." The concrete began to flow. Marcus watched 37 years of self-sufficiency disappear beneath a gray river of Portland cement. The sound was obscene, liquid stone glugging into the earth, filling spaces that had known only pure water since the Pleistocene epoch. Plan his insurance against an uncertain future, disappearing beneath 3 tons of industrial concrete. "You're making a mistake," he said, but his voice lacked conviction now. The damage was done. "The only mistake was allowing this violation to persist for so long," Phyllis replied, making notes on her tablet. "This should serve as an example to other residents who think they can ignore community standards." Across the street, Marcus noticed more neighbors gathering. The Hendersons, the young couple from the corner house, even old Mr. Yakovich, who rarely left his property. Word was spreading through the development like wildfire. The HOA was finally taking action against Marcus Chen, the engineer, who thought he was above the rules. The concrete truck emptied its load in 12 minutes. 12 minutes to destroy nearly 4 decades of engineering, of independence, of connection to the land beneath their feet. When the last gray glop fell from the chute, the driver climbed back into his cab without meeting Marcus's eyes. "Clean up!" "Crew will be by this afternoon to smooth the surface," Phyllis announced, consulting her tablet again. "We'll have landscaping installed, decorative plantings next week. Native species, naturally, in compliance with our water conservation guidelines." The irony was so sharp, it drew blood. Water conservation. They'd just sealed off the most reliable water source in the development and called it conservation. "This isn't over," Marcus said quietly. "Oh, but it is." Phyllis's smile was victorious and cold. "This is exactly what over looks like, Mr. Chen. Compliance, order, community standards upheld." She gestured toward his house, his landscaping, his life. "Perhaps now you'll understand that in Willowbrook Estates, we do things the right way." The convoy departed at 7:23 a.m., leaving behind only the acrid smell of diesel exhaust and the wet concrete smell of Marcus's buried dreams. Elena stood beside him, her hand finding his, both of them staring at the gray circle where their head had been. "What do we do now?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his engineer's mind already working through the implications. That well hadn't just served their property. The aquifer it tapped was extensive, feeding underground streams that connected to his head snapped up. A cold certainty settled in his stomach like a stone. "Alina," he said slowly, "get me the geological survey maps from my office, the ones from when I first drilled the well." "Marcus, what? Just get them now." She hurried inside, while Marcus stood staring at the concrete patch, his mind racing through calculations he hadn't considered in decades. Water table elevation, aquifer interconnectivity, the underground geology that Phyllis Hartman and her HOA board had never bothered to investigate. Alina returned with a manila folder, thick with yellowed documents. Marcus spread the geological survey across his patio table, his finger tracing the blue lines that mapped underground water flow. His hands were steady now, the engineer in him, overriding the homeowner's grief. "Here," he said, pointing to a complex network of underground streams, "and here, the aquifer my well tapped into wits not isolated. It feeds the main water table for this entire area." Alina leaned closer, studying the technical drawings she'd never understood before. "What does that mean?" Marcus looked up at the houses scattered across Willowbrook Estates, at the manicured lawns and decorative fountains, at the neighborhood that Phyllis Hartman was so determined to perfect. His voice was quiet, almost conversational. "It means they just cut off their own water supply?" As if summoned by his words, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared. By noon, Phyllis Hartman's phone was ringing every 30 seconds. She stood in her marble-floored kitchen, watching the caller ID flash with increasing irritation. First Janet Henderson, then the Rodriguez family, Then that insufferable young couple from Elm Street who always complained about the landscaping assessments, all calling about the same ridiculous non-issue. "Phyllis, thank God you answered." Janet Henderson's voice crackled through the speaker. "Our water's been out for 3 hours. The city says there's no outage in our area. Have you heard anything from the other board members?" "I'm sure it's temporary," Phyllis replied, though she'd been filling water pitchers from her own increasingly temperamental faucet all morning. These things resolve themselves. But what if Phyllis ended the call and immediately dialed her husband Richard at his law office downtown? He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with a particular strain that came from fielding calls about HOA business. "Please tell me you didn't actually fill that man's well with concrete," he said without preamble. "Good afternoon to you too, darling." Phyllis walked to her kitchen window, looking out over the development where she'd spent 8 years building the perfect community. And yes, we followed through on the violation notice. As discussed, "Phyllis, I've had 7 calls from residents in the last hour. Everyone's water is out." "That's a city infrastructure problem, not an HOA matter, is it?" Richard's voice carried the sharp edge he usually reserved for opposing counsel. "Because I'm looking at the geological survey for that area right now, and there's something you need to know about underground water systems." The first flutter of genuine concern moved through Phyllis's chest. What kind of something? The kind where filling one well with concrete can affect the entire regional water table. The kind where your HOA might have just created a multi-million-dollar liability. Phyllis set down her coffee cup with excessive care. That's impossible. It was one small well unpermitted. A code violation. That small well tapped into the primary aquifer feeding your entire development. Jesus, Phyllis, didn't you have an environmental impact study done before? We don't need studies to enforce compliance with community standards. But even as she said it, Phyllis felt the ground shifting beneath her perfectly organized world. One well can't affect an entire neighborhood's water supply. That's not how it works. Actually, it's exactly how it works when that well is the pressure release valve for an underground river system. I'm reading the environmental report from when the development was first built. Marcus Chen's well wasn't just accessing the aquifer, was regulating it. The phone slipped in Phyllis's grip. Through her window, she could see Mrs. Rodriguez dragging a garden hose toward her front door, probably trying to siphon water from somewhere. The Hendersons' sprinkler system had stopped mid-cycle, leaving half their lawn soaked and half bone dry. "That's not possible," she repeated, but her voice had lost its conviction. The engineering consultants explicitly recommended preserving any existing wells during construction to maintain aquifer pressure. Chen's well has been acting as a natural overflow valve for 37 years. Without it, what? Richard's silence stretched long enough for Phyllis to hear her own heartbeat. Without it, the entire underground water system reroutes. The city's main water lines depend on consistent aquifer pressure to maintain flow. When you plugged that, well, you essentially kinked the garden hose for the entire district. Phyllis sank into her kitchen chair, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the granite countertop. "How long before it's fixed?" "Fixed?" Richard's laugh was hollow. "Phyllis, you can't unplug a well filled with concrete. That's permanent. The water table will stabilize eventually, but the flow patterns have changed forever. Some areas might get water back, others won't." The reality hit her like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you just turned a $30 million development into a collection of houses with no water supply. I'm saying the insurance company is going to laugh at our claim. I'm saying every resident in Willowbrook Estates is about to sue the HOA for damages that could bankrupt us 10 times over." Phyllis's doorbell rang, the Westminster chimes echoing through her house like a death knell. Through the frosted glass, she could see a crowd of figures, angry gesticulating figures. "Richard, I have to go." "Phyllis, whatever you do, don't admit fault. Don't say anything about the well. We need to control the narrative." She hung up and walked to the front door, her heels clicking against marble with funeral precision. Through the sidelight window, she could see half the neighborhood gathered on her perfect lawn. Janet Henderson in the front, her usually immaculate hair disheveled, Mrs. Rodriguez clutching an empty water bottle. The young couple from Elm Street, their toddler crying in the woman's arms. And behind them all, like a dark omen, Marcus Chen. He wasn't part of the angry crowd. He stood apart, leaning against his truck, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with the calm detachment of a man who'd seen this coming from the beginning. Phyllis opened the door with her most professional smile. "Good afternoon, everyone. I understand there are some concerns about the water service." "Some concerns?" Janet Henderson's voice cracked with hysteria. "Phyllis, we haven't had water for 4 hours. My husband called the city, the water department, even the county. They all say the same thing. There's no problem with the municipal system. So what the hell is going on?" "These infrastructure issues are complex," Phyllis began, falling back on the bureaucratic language that had served her so well in 8 years of HOA management. "I'm sure the appropriate authorities cut the bullshit." The voice came from Tom Rodriguez, a usually quiet man who managed a construction crew downtown. "My wife saw that concrete truck at Chen's place this morning. The same time our water stopped working." "That's not a coincidence." The crowd murmured agreement, their voices rising like a tide. Phyllis felt the familiar thrill of authority slipping away, replaced by something she'd never experienced in her perfectly controlled life: genuine fear. "The enforcement of community standards is an ongoing process," she said, her voice rising to carry over the crowd. "Individual violations cannot be allowed to." "You destroyed his well," Mrs. Patel interrupted, her usually gentle voice sharp with accusation. "And now none of us have water. My children are asking why they can't brush their teeth. The well was unpermitted. A clear violation of, did you know?" The question came from Marcus Chen, his voice cutting through the crowd noise like a blade. He'd moved closer, close enough that Phyllis could see the cold certainty in his eyes. "When you ordered that concrete pour, did you know what would happen?" Every eye turned to her. 24 neighbors, friends, people she'd shared barbecues and block parties with, all staring at her with growing understanding. The truth was written. In their faces, they were beginning to realize that Phyllis Hartman, their HOA president, their guardian of property values and community standards, had destroyed their lives over a code violation. "I enforced the covenants," she said, her voice smaller now but still defiant. Marcus Chen violated community standards for 18 months. The board voted to fill a functioning well with concrete without understanding what that well actually did. Marcus said quietly, "Did any of you bother to research the geological impact? Did you consult with engineers? Did you consider why that well had been operating successfully for 37 years? Silence fell over the crowd. Even the toddler had stopped crying. "You didn't, did you?" Marcus continued, his voice carrying the weight of professional expertise and personal devastation. "You saw a code violation and decided to fix it with concrete. No study, no consultation, no understanding of consequences." Janet Henderson turned from Marcus to Phyllis, her face white with dawning horror. "Oh my God, you didn't know. You had no idea what you were doing." "I knew exactly what I was doing," Phyllis snapped, her authority voice returning. "I was maintaining community standards, protecting property values, ensuring compliance with established covenants." "You were destroying the water supply for 67 families," Marcus said with devastating calm, "including your own." The words hung in the air like a curse. Phyllis felt her neighbors' eyes on her, saw the moment when their confusion turned to comprehension, their frustration to fury. These weren't just residents anymore. They were victims. "This is temporary," she said, but her voice cracked on the word. "The city will fix. The city can't fix this." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing the screen to the crowd. "I've been in contact with the Municipal Water Authority all morning. They're saying the same thing I told you 18 months ago. My well was part of the regional water management system. By plugging it, you've permanently altered the aquifer flow for this entire district." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice shaking. "What does that mean? Permanently?" Marcus looked at her with genuine compassion. "It means some houses might get water back when the system rebalances, others won't. There's no way to predict which ones until the aquifer pressure stabilizes, and that could take months." Months. The word came from multiple voices at once. Maybe longer. Marcus's engineering training made him precise, even in delivering devastating new. The emergency HOA board meeting convened at 7 p.m. in the community center. But it felt more like a tribunal than a neighborhood gathering. Phyllis sat at the head table, flanked by the 4 other board members who'd voted to fill Marcus Chen's well with concrete. Before them, 67 families packed every available seat, their faces carrying the hollow exhaustion of people who'd spent 8 hours discovering what life without water actually meant. Richard Hartman stood at the back of the room, lawyer's instincts keeping him away from the board table where his wife sat, like a general watching her army desert. He'd driven back from downtown after spending the afternoon fielding calls from insurance companies, city officials, and a growing number of attorneys who smelled blood in the water. Ironic, given the circumstances. "I want to start by acknowledging everyone's concerns," Phyllis began, her voice carrying its usual authority despite the tremor underneath. "We're facing an unprecedented infrastructure challenge." Unprecedented, my ass. The interruption came from Tom Rodriguez, who stood near the front with his arms crossed. "You destroyed a working well and killed our water supply. There's nothing unprecedented about cause and effect." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Phyllis felt the careful control she'd maintained for 8 years as HOA president beginning to crack like poorly mixed concrete. Acted in accordance with established community standards, she continued, reading from notes she'd prepared during her husband's increasingly frantic phone calls. "The well in question was unpermitted and in violation of Section 4.7 of the covenants. Section 4.7 doesn't exist." The voice came from the back of the room, calm and devastating in its certainty. Marcus Chen stood near the exit, holding a thick folder of documents. "I've spent the afternoon reviewing the original HOA, incorporation papers, and every covenant revision since 2006. There is no Section 4.7 addressing wells or water features." The room went dead silent. Phyllis felt her mouth go dry, another irony she couldn't appreciate in the moment. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The Architectural Review Board clearly states." "The Architectural Review Board has authority over visible structures and landscaping," Marcus continued, stepping forward with the deliberate pace of a man who'd prepared for this moment. "Wells, septic systems, and utility infrastructure are specifically excluded from HOA oversight under California Civil Code 4600. They always have been." Board member Steve Kavitsky, a retired accountant who'd rubber-stamped every one of Phyllis's initiatives for 3 years, was frantically scrolling through his tablet. "I'm not seeing Section 4.7 anywhere in our current covenants." "Because it doesn't exist," Marcus said simply. Phyllis made it up. The accusation hit the room like a physical force. 67 families turned to stare at their HOA president, the woman they'd trusted to protect their property values and community standards, with dawning horror. "I did not make anything up," Phyllis snapped, her composure finally cracking. The well was clearly in violation of multiple community standards: visual blight, unpermitted construction, failure to maintain aesthetic consistency. "Show us the documentation." Janet Henderson's voice cut through Phyllis's justifications like a scalpel. "If you had legal authority to fill that well, show us the specific covenant language that gave you that authority." Phyllis looked down at her notes, her carefully prepared talking points suddenly feeling like tissue paper in a hurricane. The truth was, she'd been so certain of her authority, so convinced that community standards trumped individual property rights, that she'd never bothered to verify the specific legal language. Section 4.7 had sounded official enough, and no one had ever challenged her before. "The board operates under broad authority to maintain community standards," she said weakly. "That's not an answer," Tom Rodriguez said. "That's not even close to an answer." Richard Hartman stepped forward from the back of the room, his lawyer instincts overriding his marital loyalty. "Perhaps we should table this discussion until the board can review the specific covenant language with legal counsel." "No." The word came from Mrs. Patel, spoken with quiet fury. "My children have been asking me all day why they can't take baths, why they can't brush their teeth, why we might have to move. I'm not waiting for more lawyer games. I want to know right now. Did our HOA president have legal authority to destroy our water supply?" All eyes turned to Marcus, who'd become the de facto expert witness in his own persecution. He opened his folder, pulling out a thick stack of papers. "I've reviewed every HOA document filed with the county since this development was incorporated," he said. "The original CCNRs, every amendment, every board resolution. Not only is there no Section 4.7 addressing wells, but there's specific language excluding utility infrastructure from HOA oversight. He held up a highlighted document, Section 3.2 of the original covenants, which has never been amended. The association shall have no authority over individual property improvements related to utilities, including but not limited to private wells, septic systems, solar installations, and backup power generation, provided such improvements comply with applicable municipal and county codes. The silence that followed was deafening. Board member Patricia Wells, a real estate agent who'd sold half the homes in Willowbrook Estates, looked like she was about to be sick. "Marcus," she said quietly, "are you saying the well was legal, that we had no authority to order it filled?" "I'm saying the well was not only legal, but explicitly protected under the HOA's own founding documents." Marcus's voice carried no triumph, only the weary sadness of a man who'd tried to prevent a disaster and been ignored. "I'm saying this board acted completely outside its legal authority." The room erupted. Voices rose in anger, confusion, and growing panic as 67 families began to process the full magnitude of what had been done to them. Their HOA hadn't just made a mistake, they'd committed what amounted to destruction of property based on completely fabricated authority. "Order," Phyllis shouted, banging her gavel repeatedly. "I will have order in this meeting. You'll have lawsuits," Janet Henderson shot back, rising from her seat. "You'll have so many lawsuits you won't know which end is up, and when this is over, you'll have nothing left but empty houses and dry wells." Board member Mike Chen, no relation to Marcus, had gone pale, his engineering background making him understand the implications faster than the others. "Phyllis, if we acted without authority, if the well was legally protected, then we're personally liable for damages." Richard Hartman finished grimly. "All of us. The HOA insurance won't cover actions taken outside our legal authority." The full scope of the disaster was beginning to crystallize. Not only had they destroyed the water supply for the entire development, but they'd done it illegally, exposing themselves to personal liability that could destroy them financially. Tom Rodriguez stood up, his construction worker's pragmatism cutting through the legal complexities. "Forget the lawsuits for a minute. I've got 3 kids and a mortgage. What I want to know is simple. Can we get our water back?" Marcus looked at him with genuine compassion. "I've been in contact with hydrologists from UC Davis all afternoon. The short answer is no. The concrete in my well has disrupted the aquifer flow permanently. The water table will eventually rebalance, but it could take years, and there's no guarantee any of these houses will be included in the new flow pattern." Years. The word came from multiple voices at once. "Underground water systems are complex," Marcus explained, falling back into his engineering training. "When you disrupt a flow that's been stable for decades, the effects cascade through the entire regional network. Some areas might get water back in 6 months, others might never see adequate pressure again." Mrs. Rodriguez raised her hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "What about our homes? If there's no water, are they even livable?" "No," Marcus said simply. "Not under current health codes. The county will eventually condemn any structure without adequate water supply." The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Condemned homes, worthless properties. Families forced to abandon mortgages on houses they could no longer legally occupy. Patricia Wells, her real estate background making her process the financial implications first, spoke in a hollow voice. "The property values, oh God, the property values are going to collapse completely." "There won't be any property values," Marcus corrected gently. "You can't sell a condemned house. These properties will be worthless until water service is restored, if it ever is." Janet Henderson had started crying again, but this time her tears carried a different quality, not just grief, but rage. "Phyllis, do you understand what you've done? You haven't just destroyed our water supply. You've destroyed our lives, our children's futures, everything we've worked for." Phyllis sat at the head table, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. 8 years of community leadership, of building what she'd believed was the perfect neighborhood, had just collapsed into ruins, more complete than any natural disaster could have achieved. "I was trying to protect the community," she said, but the words sounded pathetic, even to her own ears. You were trying to win a power struggle, Marcus said quietly, and you were willing to destroy anything that got in your way. The AC. 3 weeks after the concrete dried, Willowbrook Estates looked like a zombie apocalypse movie set. Moving trucks lined every street as families fled their waterless homes, leaving behind dead lawns, empty pools, and for sale signs that no one bothered to call about. The neighborhood that Phyllis Hartman had spent 8 years perfecting was dying, one family at a time. Marcus Chen stood on his back patio. Watching the Henderson family load their minivan for the 3rd time that morning, they'd been staying with Janet's sister in Sacramento while trying to salvage what they could from their condemned house. The county health department had given all residents 30 days to evacuate or face criminal charges for occupying uninhabitable structures. They're good people, Alina said. Joining him with 2 cups of coffee made with bottled water, they'd driven 20 miles to buy in bulk. This isn't right. Marcus took the coffee gratefully, though it tasted like guilt. None of this is right. Through the chain-link fence that separated their property from the rest of the development, he could see Tom Rodriguez hosing down his truck with water from a borrowed tank, trying to clean off construction dust before his family's final departure. The Patels had left yesterday, their children confused about why they couldn't go home to their own beds. Mrs. Rodriguez had moved in with her daughter in Fresno, taking only what would fit in 2 suitcases. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus and Alina were the only residents of Willowbrook Estates who still had water. Drawing from the emergency hookup they'd installed to their neighbor's pool filtration system, but they were also the only ones who couldn't leave, trapped by a legal system that moved at geological speed while their community collapsed around them. The lawyer called this morning, Alina said quietly. 3 more families are joining the class action. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. The lawsuit had started small, just the Hendersons and Rodriguezes seeking damages for their destroyed homes. But as word spread about the HOA's illegal actions, it had grown into a monster that threatened to consume everything in its path. 64 families, their mortgages, their futures, their children's college funds, all of it, balanced on the edge of financial ruin. What's the latest count? He asked. 87 million in claimed damages, plus punitive damages, plus attorney fees. Alina sat down heavily in her patio chair, looking older than her 58 years. Richard Hartman called yesterday, begging us not to testify against the board. What did you tell him? I told him his wife destroyed our lives, and he wants us to lie about it in court. She sipped her coffee with the bitter satisfaction of someone who'd finally stopped being polite. He hung up on me. Across the development, a county inspector's truck pulled up to the Yakovich house, the elderly widower's last stand against the evacuation order. Marcus could see the old man on his porch, arguing with officials who were just doing their jobs. By tomorrow, even he would be gone, leaving behind the house he'd lived in for 15 years. Alina, Marcus said carefully, what if we're the bad guys in this story? She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean, what if I should have just filled in the well when they first asked? What if my pride, my need to be right, what if that's what destroyed this entire community? Alina set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. Marcus Chen, don't you dare. Don't you dare take responsibility for what Phyllis Hartman did. But if I'd just compromised, if you'd compromised, they would have found something else to go after, you know that. Her voice carried the steel that had sustained their marriage through 35 years. That woman was never interested in community standards. She was interested in control. And the minute you showed her she couldn't control you, she decided to destroy you instead. Marcus knew she was right, but the knowledge didn't ease the weight in his chest. Every moving truck, every family torn from their home, every child forced to leave their friends, all of it had started with his refusal to back down from a fight he'd never wanted. The kids are taking it the hardest, Alina continued, watching the Henderson children help their parents load boxes. Jenny Henderson asked her mother yesterday if it was her fault their house didn't work anymore. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd met Jenny Henderson, exactly Twisa, 7-year-old with gap teeth and boundless energy, who'd decorated the neighborhood with sidewalk chalk drawings. Now she was blaming herself for an adult conflict that had spiraled beyond all reason. I'm going to talk to them, he said, standing up. Marcus, no. You can't fix this by apologizing to every family that's leaving. I can try. He walked across his yard and through the gate that separated his property from the HOA-controlled streets. The Hendersons looked up as he approached, their expressions cycling through surprise, wariness, and resignation. "Mr. Chen," Janet Henderson said tiredly. "If you're here to gloat, I'm here to apologize," Marcus interrupted. "To all of you, this should never have happened." Tom Rodriguez, loading the last of the Hendersons' furniture, paused with a box in his hands. "You didn't fill your own well with concrete, Marcus. You don't owe us an apology." "I do, though." Marcus looked at the children, Jenny Henderson clutching a stuffed animal, the Rodriguez twins trying to be brave while their world collapsed. "I could have handled this differently. I could have found a way to compromise that didn't lead to ... this." Janet Henderson's expression softened slightly. "You tried to warn us. You told Phyllis what would happen. She chose not to listen. I could have tried harder. I could have explained it better, made them understand. Stop." The command came from Mrs. Patel, who'd returned to collect some items she'd forgotten. "Just stop. Marcus. We all know who's responsible for this mess, and it isn't you." She gestured toward the HOA president's house, where Phyllis Hartman's BMW sat in the driveway like a monument to stubborn pride. "That woman had 18 months to research the implications of filling your well. 18 months to consult experts, to understand water systems, to act like a responsible leader. Instead, she spent that time figuring out how to win a power struggle she started." Marcus felt the truth of her words, but it didn't ease his guilt. "Your children shouldn't have. To pay for adult stupidity." "No, they shouldn't," Mrs. Patel agreed. "But that's not your fault either. Children pay for adult stupidity every day. Car accidents, divorces, job losses, bad decisions. It's part of growing up in an imperfect world." She loaded another box into her car, her movements sharp with suppressed anger. "What makes this different is that it was completely preventable, not by you giving up your rights, but by the HOA board doing their basic due diligence before acting." Across the street, another moving truck arrived at the Chen house, no relation to Marcus, despite the shared name. The electrical engineer who lived there had found a job in Portland and was relocating his entire family rather than fight a system that had already proven its willingness to destroy lives over paperwork. "How many families are left?" Marcus asked. 12, Tom Rodriguez answered. "Most of them staying with relatives while they figure out what to do with houses they can't sell and mortgages they still have to pay." The economics of the disaster were staggering. 67 families, most of them carrying mortgages on properties that were now worthless, banks that couldn't foreclose on condemned buildings, insurance companies that wouldn't cover damage from illegal HOA actions, an entire community's worth of wealth vanishing like water into sand. "The county's talking about buying the whole development," Janet Henderson said quietly. "Eminent domain. Pennies on the dollar." Marcus felt his stomach drop. For what? Solar farm. Apparently the land's perfect for it, flat, unobstructed, and now conveniently empty of residents who might complain about industrial development in their backyard. The bitter irony was complete. Phyllis Hartman's perfect community, destroyed by her obsession with control, would be replaced by acres of solar panels generating clean energy for cities that still had functioning water systems. "There's something else," Tom Rodriguez said, lowering his voice. "Patricia Wells, she's talking about suicide." The words hit the group like a cold wind. Patricia Wells, the real estate agent who'd sold most of them their homes, was facing not just financial ruin but professional destruction. Her license was under review, her reputation destroyed, her own home as worthless as everyone else's. "Where is she now?" Alina asked, having approached during the conversation. "Staying with her sister in Modesto, but she's not taking calls, not responding to texts." Her sister's worried. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of consequences that kept expanding, like ripples in a poisoned pond. How many lives would be destroyed before this was over? How many families pushed beyond their breaking point by a conflict that should have been resolved with a simple conversation 18 months ago? "We have to do something," he said. "Like what?" Janet Henderson asked. "File more lawsuits, destroy more lives, add more guilt to a situation that's already unbearable." Marcus didn't have an answer. The legal system was grinding forward with inexorable momentum, but justice, if it came at all, would arrive. Too late to save the community that had already been sacrificed to Phyllis Hartman's pride, I keep thinking about that morning, Alina said quietly, watching the concrete truck, knowing what was going to happen, feeling so helpless to stop it.